Hey guys, this is Steven with Bourbon Bay Talks. I'll be your host. And I decided to start off my first video. So if it's a little rough, just bear with me. Again, this is my first video for my new podcast. And I decided to start off my first video with one of my favorite bourbons called E.H. Taylor Small Batch Bourbon from Buffalo Trace Distillery. It's a bottled and bond. Um, Definitely very smooth. It's 100 proof, and you definitely get some great like cinnamon notes, vanilla notes, a little honey in there, and butterscotch. You could say it definitely got some nice color to it, and as like, hey, being from if you're a wino, you get those lovely little legs right there. I always find it funny, and after learning a couple of years, is that really all the thing that the legs really tell you is just how viscous it is, being a little bit thicker. But kind of a little backstory on E.H. Taylor. He was a banker, and back in the mid 1860s, he decided to start his own distillery out there in Kentucky, and it was called the Hermitage. And 2 years later, uh, he purchased the Leestown Distillery, which he named the OFC Distillery, which would become the forerunner of the Buffalo Trace Distillery. And we do owe a lot to Colonel E.H. Taylor in the fact that he is considered the modern father of the modern bourbon industry. He brought over a lot of techniques that he learned while on his trips over to Europe. One of those including the steam powered work warehouses where they are kept at a constant temperature. So during the winter, they can actually keep the aging process going, even though it might be, you know, like 20 or 19 degrees, which after a certain point, bourbon stops aging after a certain degree. So I think it's like about 30 degrees. But if someone out there wants to correct me, hey, you're more than welcome to. And it's just a great, nice little bourbon. Usually, a lot of the products that comes from Buffalo Trace usually are pretty good. Uh, and we definitely also owe a lot to Colonel E.H. Taylor and the fact that he was one of the big factors in getting the Bottle and Bond Act passed through Congress back in 1897, which was actually one of the first regulatory acts for food. And basically, the act made it that uh, bourbon had to be distilled during one distilling season, whether that be the fall or summer seasons. Then it had to be um, a certain proof, and then it had to be put into a bonded warehouse. And basically, it was watched over by the federal government. And because of that, people, when they bought a bottle and bond bourbon, they knew exactly what they were getting because it was strict, very highly regulated. So you could trust what was coming in your product because back in those days, there was a lot of, let's say, fake or impersonators that when you bought a bottle of bourbon, you had no idea what you were getting. A lot of the times in bars, when they would purchase bourbon, it would just be coming in the barrels themselves, and they would either water those barrels down so they could get more spirit out of it. Stop. And basically, thanks to Colonel Taylor, we were able to now finally have a true blue bourbon that we knew what we were getting. So now to kind of go a little bit about what the Bourbon Bay Talks is going to be about. It's a show where I hope to kind of share my passion about bourbon with everybody and to go a little bit beyond just kind of what I did with telling you about the notes, the legs, the color. While that's all cool, and a lot of other bourbon shows are out there or whiskey shows that talk about that, and it gives you a lot of great information. But I feel like sometimes some of them miss out a little bit like on the history, of how we got bourbon, how it became America's spirit. So that's kind of my hope to talk about on this show. Hope to have quite a few different topics on different episodes. I hope this first episode kind of gets you excited about what's to come. Again, I'm just learning about all this, so just bear with me. And as I learn, hopefully things will get definitely a lot better. Uh, but a little bit about myself. I'm a wine and spirit consultant at a local spirit and wine company down here in the state of Florida, the great state. And I'm out of the Tampa Bay area, hence the name Bourbon Bay Talks, or as some people would like to call us now, Champa Bay. But hey, when your city wins a couple championships over the last year, you kind of deserve it. So, hey, even though I know some people are going to be giving me a low crap about that. So, hey, but, we'll see. And then I also recently just earned my executive bourbon stewardship from the Stave and Seath Society, which is run by the Moonshine University in the lovely city of Louisville, Kentucky. And there I learned a lot about not only from the history of bourbon, the sensory areas, how to make it, which is really very interesting, and hopefully we'll definitely talk about that and maybe eventually go into a distillery so I can show you guys some of that stuff, because that's kind of what drove my passion about it. But to say, like, one of my stories also about how I got into whiskey was, I'm sure, like many, and I'm sure many of you guys will have your own different stories, which I hope to hear, on how you guys got involved or started loving whiskey or bourbons. And some of that has to do with, I was in college down in Fort Myers at Florida Gulf Coast University. Go Eagles. And when you're living with four roommates, guy roommates, you can definitely say that you bring any kind of alcohol into that area, it is not going to last very long. And that was the case for sure. I had many times where I would purchase some rum or vodka, even though, let's say, I wasn't really into those too much, but or beer. And guess what? My friends would definitely drink that night. So I think one time I was out at a bar with some of my buddies and tried some whiskey, thought it was really good, and started loving that whiskey Coke with Jack Daniels. That was my first whiskey that I really started to like. And ever since then, I brought that into the house. My roommates would not touch it, so it could last forever. And that's kind of one of my funny little stories. I'm sure once I have one of my other friends on here, they'll definitely be telling you plenty of other stories. And that's what I hope to have. The fun of this show is those stories, the history, like I kind of talked about with D.H. Taylor. I hope to talk about that with other bourbons, other distilleries, because I think, and then just the story of whiskey, because it's played such an integral role in how our country got formed. From why we had, one of the major reasons on why the revolution started. A lot of people would say, well, it's the Tea Party and the taxation. Well, a lot of it was the taxation because of, they were taxing molasses, they were taxing corn and other things, and the ingredients that Americans during those times used to make whiskeys or rum. So yeah, we weren't too happy about it. And then, after the revolution, one of the first taxes to try to raise money that Alexander Hamilton wanted to impose was the whiskey tax. And it wasn't a very fair tax. It seemed to favor the big whiskey and distillers, and was very hard on the rural farmer whiskey distillers. And we ended up having the Whiskey Rebellion, which was one of the first things that George Washington, during this young country's start, had to deal with. And him being his own whiskey distiller himself down in Mount Vernon, he was actually one of the largest distillers in the country during his time. But yeah, so you can see that whiskey has played a huge part. It's helped build a lot of the infrastructure in the U.S. from the taxes that have been placed on whiskey. Um, but yeah, so we kind of want to talk about the history of whiskey. We want to talk about the backgrounds behind many of our favorite brands, many of them coming from myths, uh, which some branders or advertisers probably wouldn't want other people to be talking about because that's what sells their brand is those myths and legends that have come up, like the Elijah Craig, um, Old Foresters, Frontier Bourbon. But yeah, so I mean, there's so many great different things that we can talk about, and we will talk about on this show. Um, and basically the rise, the fall, and the rebirth of this great spirit that has become America's spirit now. And that's kind of one of the things we're going to talk about on the show. I'm going to hopefully have some great guests, whether that's members of the industry, whether it's just some of my friends and or people that are in the retail bar, just wherever we can see about it, or maybe even some sports people, who I want this show to be kind of for not just basically bourbon aficionados, but I kind of want this show to be about like people who may just be starting their journey into bourbon and want to see why is this maybe a better spirit to try than, let's say, a vodka or rum or a gin. I mean, they all have their own great stories, but I feel like bourbon kind of has even more so. It's America's only spirit, and it has a great history, a great story to tell. And I think one of the greatest things that it allows people to do is that when you get a good bottle of bourbon, like an E.H. Taylor, it kind of forces you to sit down, slow down, and then basically, you know, sip it and enjoy it, because bourbon is definitely not something that you want to be chugging like a shot or something like that. It's gonna burn like hell. But if you sip it and enjoy it, it really is just a great way to kind of relax. People end up telling you stories, especially any good friends or family. And kind of one of my favorite sayings from one of my favorite shows that kind of inspired this a little bit was Jack Maxwell's saying of like how you can pour a glass and sit down with somebody and basically the world opens up to you. So hopefully have that kind of same concept where we're going to talking about different bourbons every episode and or whiskeys, and basically just hopefully have a good time, educate you, or maybe hey, you teach me something, and we'll learn together. We'll be on this journey together. Um, but most important of all, it's like when someone asks you, and something I've learned over the last couple of years too, is that when someone asks you what's the best way to drink whiskey or bourbon, and then you basically say, well, what's the way you like to drink it? And then if they tell you 1,000 different stories, Manhattans with Coke, with you know whiskey sours, well, then you can basically just tell them, well, that's the best way to enjoy whiskey is the way you like it, because that is something that I've truly learned over my time in working in retail, selling spirits, and also through the Stave and Seath Society, um, where, yeah, I mean, bourbon is meant to be enjoyed by everybody, and they kind of have to enjoy it the way they like for them to want to, for them to best experience it. So that I hope you guys enjoy this little intro into the Bourbon Bay talks. Um, as every episode comes on, I'll let you guys know, and hopefully every episode will get better from here as I learn. Um, and yeah, I hope to teach you guys a lot and hope to share this journey with you, my passion for it. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, night, evening, whenever you're viewing this video. Hope to share a glass with you guys, and hopefully we can all be friends and family soon. So, hey, Salancha, have a great day. Enjoy.